Drishti IAS is pleased to revise its program specially targeting GS Paper 4, which deals with ethics, integrity, and aptitude. In this episode of the program, Ethics, Definitions and Concepts, we will discuss definitions of attitude and the concepts related to it. So, what is attitude? Attitude is an enduring organization of beliefs, feelings, and behavioral tendencies towards an attitude object. That can be a person, group, event, ideology, or symbol. Attitude can be positive or negative, depending upon one's behavior or belief towards the object. For example, if I say, I hate black people, in this example, the person or me is having a negative attitude towards black people. Now, let's focus on attitude, content, structure, and functions. Let's begin with the content of the attitude. Content can be divided into two parts, namely explicit and implicit. Explicit content of attitude is formed as a result of conscious cognition, which means a person is aware of his or her attitude, influenced by recent events, deliberate thinking is involved, and also known as self-reported attitude. While on the other hand, implicit attitude, they are formed as a result of unconscious cognition, which means determined by past memories, easily accessible, close relation to effective experience, no deliberate thinking, and presence of cultural bias. Let's now shift our focus towards structure of attitude. Structure comprises components and dimensions of attitude. Within structure, let's discuss components first. Attitude structure can be described in terms of three components, also known as the ABC model of attitude. Affective component. This involves a person's feelings, emotions about the attitude object. For example, I am scared of spiders. Behavioral component. This involves a tendency to act in a certain manner. For example, I will avoid spiders and scream if I see one. And lastly, cognitive component. This involves a person's belief, knowledge about an attitude object. For example, I believe spiders are dangerous. Now, let us look at the dimensions of attitude. To begin with, attitude strength. Strong attitudes are those that are firmly held and that influence a person's behavior strongly. People tend to have stronger attitudes about things, events, ideas, or people on which they have considerable knowledge and information. For example, a strong attitude towards any celebrity influences behavior in the form of reverence and resistance to any negative comments against the celebrity. Attitude accessibility. Attitudes that are easily accessed from memory. Easily accessible attitudes are more predictive of behavior and influential for the messages. For example, some attitudes are activated in people without conscious awareness, like pro-smoking attitudes, which result in continuation of smoking behavior. And lastly, attitude ambivalence. It is the simultaneous possession of both positive and negative attitudes towards the object. It may exist as a result of conflicting values. For example, an ambivalent attitude exists towards joint family due to respect for parents as well as for personal choice and freedom. Now, let us look at the functions of attitude. Daniel Katz outlines 4 functions of attitudes: adjustment function, ego defensive function, value expressive function, and knowledge function. Adjustment function. Attitudes help people to adjust to their work environment. It serves the utilitarian concept of maximizing reward and minimizing punishment. For example, when employees are well treated, they are likely to develop a positive attitude towards the management and the organization. And when they are criticized and given a minimal salary, they are likely to develop a negative attitude. Ego defensive function. Ego defensive function refers to holding attitudes that protect our self-esteem or that justify actions that make us feel guilty. The function involves psychoanalytic defense mechanisms to protect themselves from psychological harm. For example, an older manager whose decisions are continually challenged by a younger subordinate may feel that the latter is immature and inexperienced. In truth, the younger subordinate may be right in challenging the decisions, and the older manager is not going to admit this, but will try to protect the ego by blaming the other party. Value expressive function. It basically represents the expression of the person's centrally held values. Central values tend to establish our identity and gain us social approval, thereby showing us who we are and what we stand for. Persons adopt certain attitudes to translate their values into something more tangible and easily expressed. For example, one whose central value is freedom. The individual may express very positive attitudes towards the decentralization of authority in the organization, flexible work schedules, and relaxation of rest standards. And lastly, knowledge function. Attitude provides a frame of reference for stability, clarity, and organized view of the world. This allows us to predict what is likely to happen and so gives us a sense of control. Some attitudes are beneficial because they help to make the world more understandable. For example, people who are not familiar with nuclear energy may develop an attitude towards nuclear energy that is dangerous and should not be used as an energy source. Now, let us move towards the formation of attitude. Many theories are present to identify the formation of attitude, such as classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, which is learned through association. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or animal. Operant conditioning, a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishments for behavior. Through operant conditioning, an individual makes an association between a particular behavior and its related consequences. Observational learning, process of learning through watching others, retaining the information, and then later replicating the behaviors that were observed. And lastly, genetic factors. They play a very strong role in shaping some attitude than others. For example, a person's inclination towards where and with whom to live is largely determined by his or her hereditary behavior. And now, let us look at moral and political attitude. Firstly, we will focus on moral attitude. This type of attitude includes moral judgments towards an object in terms of right and wrong. Some of the dimensions of moral attitude are reverence, faithfulness, awareness of responsibility, veracity, and goodness. There is a difference in moral attitude when comparing individuals, cultures, and situations. For example, moral attitudes differ on issues like surrogacy, pornography, prostitution, homosexuality, etc., based on individual, cultures, and situations. Now let's focus on political attitude. It refers to belief and values attached to the political system, including political issues, parties, candidates, governance, and issues. Different types of political attitude exist, such as radical, reactionist, conservationist, moderate, and liberal. For example, political attitude determines our economic ideology, such as socialism or capitalism, as well as social ideology such as equality or fetish. Having discussed almost everything about attitude, now we will try to understand the relation of attitude with behavior and values. Though attitude and behavior appear similar to each other, there are a few subtle differences between these two concepts. Now let us look at the difference between attitude and behavior. Attitude is defined as a person's mental tendency, which is responsible for the way he thinks or feels for someone or something, while behavior implies the actions, moves, conduct, or functions or an individual or group towards other persons. A person's attitude is mainly based on the experiences gained by him during the course of his life and observations. On the other hand, the behavior of a person relies on the situation. Attitude is a person's inner thoughts and feelings, whereas behavior expresses a person's attitude. The way of thinking or feeling is reflected by a person's attitude. On the contrary, a person's conduct is reflected by his or her behavior. Attitude is defined by the way we perceive things, whereas behavior is ruled by social norms. Attitude is a human trait, but behavior is an inborn attribute. Similarly, we will compare attitude with values. What are the similarities between values and attitudes? To begin with, values and attitudes are two important variables influencing the cognitive process and behavior. They are learned and acquired essentially from the same sources. They endure and are resistant to change. And they have a reciprocal influence and are used interchangeably. Now let us look at the dissimilarities between values and attitudes. Values help in guiding behavior, whereas attitudes are the response that is a result of our values. Values decide what we think as for right, wrong, good, or unjust, while attitudes are our likes and dislikes of things, peoples, and objects. Values are permanent in nature, whereas attitudes are changeable with favorable experiences. Values represent a single belief that guides actions and judgment across objects and situations, while attitudes represent several beliefs focused on a specific object or situation. And lastly, values are derived from social and cultural mores, whereas attitudes are personal experiences. Now, let us look at some of the questions asked in the previous year examination. With regard to the morality of actions, one view is that means is of paramount importance, and the other view is that the ends justify the means. Which view do you think is more appropriate? Justify your answer. Young people with ethical conduct are not willing to come forward to join active politics. Suggest steps to motivate them to come forward. How could social influence and persuasion contribute to the success of Swachh Bharat Abhiyan? Our attitudes towards life, work, and other people and society are generally shaped unconsciously by the family and the social surroundings in which we grow up. Some of these unconsciously acquired attitudes and values are often undesirable in the citizens of a modern democratic egalitarian society. A. Discuss such undesirable values prevalent in today's educated Indians. And B. How can such undesirable attitudes be changed and socio-ethical values considered necessary in public services be cultivated in the aspiring and serving civil servants? Two different kinds of attitudes exhibited by public servants towards their work have been identified as bureaucratic attitudes and democratic attitudes. Distinguish between these two terms and write their merits and demerits. Is it possible to balance the two to create a better administration for the faster development of our country? With this, we end today's session of Ethics, Definitions and Concepts. Until next time, stay safe and thank you. To watch our videos in Hindi, subscribe to our Hindi YouTube channel, Drishti IAS.